The silence in the courtroom wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum that seemed to suck the very air from my lungs. He didn't look at the judge when the ruling finally came down, though his voice rang out with a clarity that sliced through the tension like a razor. Null and void. Those three words hung in the stale air, dismantling a year of calculated deceit in a single breath. He kept my gaze fixed on the defense table, watching the precise moment Mark's world collapsed. The charming, confident mask he wore like a second skin, the one that had full neighbors, banks, and for a time, even me didn't just sleep. It disintegrated. His eyes, usually crinkled with a devastatingly false warmth, went wide and hollow, void of everything but a terrifying, desperate rage. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the veins paused in his neck, a roadmap if the fury rising inside a narcissist denied his prize. This was the moment he had meticulously, quietly fought for. It wasn't merely about the Ditya house or the money he had tried to siphon away. It was the reclamation of my sovereignty, a resolute triumph in the face of absolute betrayal. But as he turned toward me, lips pulling back in a silence snarl that promised retribution far beyond the reach of the law, he realized that while the gavel had ended the case, the danger was far from over. To understand how a signature on a piece of paper became a battle for my very soul, you have to go back to the day I unwittingly invited the devil into the front door. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer silk curtains of the master bedroom, painting long, lazy stripes of gold across the duvet. He lay there for a moment, simply breathing in the scent of crisp linen and the faint, lingering aroma of Mark's expensive cologne, sandalwood, and the ambition. It was the smell of safety. From where he lay, he could see the reflection of a manicured oak tree in the vanity mirror, its branches swaying in a gentle rhythm that seemed to dictate the tempo of our entire existence. He stressed, feeling the weight of the diamond on my left hand, a heavy, sparkling anchor that tethered me to this life. This was the dream, not just a dream, but the dream, the one they sell you in glossy magazines and the romantic comedies, the one he had spent my 20s yearning for while navigating a sea of disappointments. Then came Mark, and with him, the blueprint for perfection. "You're awake," a voice rumbled from the doorway. He turned to see Mark leaning against the door frame, two steaming mugs in his hands. He was already dressed for the day, his charcoal suit tailored to within an inch of his life, his dark hair swept back with the effortless precision that made him do envy of his partners at the film. He looked like a titan of industry, yet his eyes, crinkling at the corners, held only warmth for me. "Just barely," he replied, sitting up and accepting the coffee he offered. "You're up early. Big day today, El." The murder talks are entering the final stage, he sighed, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch was firm, possessive, yet undeniably tender, but he had to make sure my better half was started off right. He smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. It was perfect, just the way he liked it, black, with a hint of cinnamon. Mark remembered everything. He curated my life with the same meticulous attention to detail he applied to his multi-million-dollar contracts. "You spoil me," he murmured. "I cherish you." He corrected, his gaze intense. "There's a difference. Besides, look around you. This house, this life, is all for us. It's the sanctuary we built." He looked past him, through the open French doors that led to the balcony. Below us, the grounds of our estate sprawled out in a tapestry of emerald green. The landscape architect had finished the rose garden last week, and from here, what concentric circles of blooming white petals looked like a target, or perhaps a wedding cake. We had bought the property as a shell, a hollow structure of brick and mortar, and together we had filled it with meaning. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, was a testament to our shared taste, our shared future. "It is beautiful," he agreed, a swell of pride rising in my chest. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm trespassing in someone else's life. Like someone is going to walk in and tell me the tour is over." Mark laughed, a low, rich sound that vibrated through the mattress. He set his cube down on the nightstand and he took my hand, kissing the knuckles. "This is your empire, Elena. You are the queen. I'm merely the knight who keeps the walls high. And the dragons out." "It is, and the dragons out," he promised, his face growing serious for a fraction of a second. "Nothing touches you here. Not the noise of the city, not the stress of the world. Here, you are safe." He stood up, checking his watch up at Philip that cost more than my parents' house. The movement was fluid, practiced. "I have to run. Dinner at 7. I'm thinking we open the Battle of 82 board decks to celebrate the murder." "7 is perfect. I'll tell Mrs. Higgins to prep the lamb," he sighed. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to my forehead that lingered just a moment longer than usual. "I love you, El. Never forget that." "I love you too, Mark." I watched him leave, listening to the heavy tread of his footsteps fading down the grand staircase, followed by the distant, solid thud of the front door closing. The silence that rushed back in was absolute. In our gated community, nestled in the hills far above the chaotic hum of the city, silence was the ultimate luxury. I rose from the bed, my feet sinking into the plush cream carpet. Moving to the balcony, I watched Mark's sleek black sedan glide down the long, winding driveway. The iron gates at the end of the property swung open automatically, sensing his approach, and he then clenched shut the moment he passed through, sealing the perimeter once more. The air outside was crisp, smelling of chewed grass and the jasmine. He leaned against the stone railing, looking out over the valley. It was a kingdom of tranquility. He had everything he had ever written down in my diary as a girl. A handsome, successful husband who adored me. A home that belonged on the cover of Architectural Digest. No more financial worries. No more fears for the future. He walked back inside, wandering through the upper hallway. My fingers trailed along the wainscoting, feeling the smooth, cool paint. He passed the guest rooms, pristine and untucked, waiting for the friends we would host, for the family we planned to start. Mark wanted 3 children. He wanted 2. We joked that we would compromise and adopt Andy 2 kids. Entering the library, the scent changed the old paper and the leather. This was my favorite room, though we rarely spent time in it. Mark preferred the study downstairs. He walked over to the massive mahogany desk he sometimes used on weekends. It was organized with military precision. A gold pen set, a leather-bound planner, a stack of files perfectly aligned. He picked up a framed photograph sitting on the corner of the desk. It was of us in front of the Eiffel Tower, taken 3 years ago, just after he proposed. He looked radiant, my head thrown back in laughter, Mark's arm tight around my waist, pulling me into him. We looked like a single entity, fused together by love and the ambition. A picture-perfect dream, he whispered to the empty room. He set the photo down, but as he did, my hand brushed against the top drawer. It was locked. He frowned slightly. Mark didn't lock things in the house. He said there were no more secrets between us. That locks were for the outside world. Curiosity, mild and fleeting, tugged at me. He tried the handle again. Definitely locked. He shrugged it off. It was likely client files, sensitive legal documents that required confidentiality. Mark was fiercely ethical about his work. It was one of the things he admired most about him, his unwavering code. He turned away from the desk and he walked to the window, gazing down at the rose garden again. From this angle, the white roses looked almost blinding in the sun. The gardener was downstairs, a small figure trimming the hedges with rhythmic snaps of his shears. Snip, snip, snip. He pressed my palm against the glass. It was thick, double-paned, soundproof. He couldn't hear the shears, nor the birds singing, nor the wind in the trees. Inside, the air was still, climate controlled to a constant 72 degrees. It was a perfect, hermetically sealed world. A sudden, strange thought struck me, unbidden and cold. The glass wasn't just there to keep the noise out. It was thick enough to keep everything in. He shook my head, laughing softly at my own imagination. He was letting the quiet get to me. He had too much time on my hands today. He needed to focus on tonight. The dinner, the celebration, the life we were building. Get a grip, Elena, he muttered, turning my back on the window and the view of the gilded gates. You have everything a woman could kill for. He walked out of the library, the heavy door clicking shut behind me, the sound echoing slightly in the vast, empty hallway. He didn't know it then, but the echo sounded remarkably like the closing of a cell door. For now, he was content to be the queen of this castle, blissfully ignoring the height of the walls. The silence in the house was no more longer peaceful, it was predatory. For 3 days, ever since the text messages had flashed across Mark's lock screen, messages explicit enough to burn the retina, he had been living in a state of suspended animation. He moved through the rooms of our Victorian restoration like a race, touching the wainscoting he had handed, staring at a bay window where we had planned to put our Christmas tree every year until we were old and grey. The affair was a jagged arrow, bleeding tear in the fabric of my reality. But he was foolish enough to think that the heartbreak was the ceiling of my suffering. He didn't realize it was merely the floor of a much deeper, darker basement. He found the envelope by accident. It wasn't hidden in a safe or a locked box, but taped carelessly beneath the bottom drawer of the antique desk in Mark's study. He had gotten sloppy. Or perhaps, worse, he simply didn't care if he found it anymore. The arrogance of the man he had married seemed to seep from the very paper as he peeled the tape away, the adhesive screeching in the quiet room. He sat in his leather chair, the leather coat against my legs, and he slid the contents out. It was a dense stack of legal documents, the paper heavy and cream-colored. At the top, in bold, in forgiving Times New Roman, were the words, "Deed of transfer." My breath hitched, a wet, rattling sound in my throat. I scanned the lines, my eyes darting frantically, hoping my brain was misinterpreting the legalese. but the words were plain. The property, located at 142 Willow Creek Lane, my home, my sanctuary, the place where he had poured my inheritance and my soul, was listed clearly. Grantor, Marka, Sterling and Elena R. Sterling, Granty, Jessica Lebar, Thorn, Jessica, the name from the text messages. The 22-year-old with the sun-bleached hair and the cruelty of use. He felt a wave of nausea roll over me, hot and acidic. Mark was giving her the house. How? We were joint tenants. He couldn't sell without me. It was impossible. Then my eyes dropped to the line item labeled consideration. The price of the sally. $1.1,0. The world tilted. He gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white. $1. He had sold our life, our future, the walls that held our memories, for a single, contemptuous dollar. It wasn't a sally. It was a transfer of power. It was a transaction of mockery. He wasn't just leaving me. He was evicting me. He was stripping me bare and handing my skin to his mistress as a trophy. No more, he whispered, the words scraping out of my throat. No more. You can't do this. He flipped to the signature page. And that was when the ice cold shot truly hit, freezing the blood in my veins. Sir, next to Mark's flamboyant, arrogant scrawl, was my name, Elena Sterling. It was written in blue ink. It had the loops, the slant, the pressure points of my handwriting. To a stranger, to a clerk at the county recorder's office, it would look authentic. But he knew the truth. He looked at the A. He never curled the top of the A lighted. And the G at the end it trailed off too sharply. He hadn't signed this. He had never seen this document before in my life. He had forged my signature. He had sat at this very desk, practiced my name, perhaps while he was sleeping upstairs or gardening in the backyard he loved so much, and he had stolen my life with a pen. He had meticulously plotted my erasure. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated annihilation. A sound at the front door made me jump. The heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding back echoed through the hallway. Mark, he didn't move. He couldn't. He sat frozen. The forged deed resting on the blotter before me like a verdict. Elena, his voice floated down the hall, casual, light, as if he hadn't just murdered our marriage and he sold the corpse for $1. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam your car. When it detailed about the timeline, he walked into the study, loosening his tie. He looked handsome, successful, and entirely unbezired. He stopped when he sallallahu alaihi wasallam me. His eyes flicked to the papers on the desk, and for a split second, sallallahu alaihi wasallam flashed a ignorance not guilt, just irritation that his timeline had been disrupted. I see you've been snooping, he sighed, his tone dropping and active, losing its faint warmth. You sold the house, he sighed. My voice sounded strange, detached, as if it were coming from someone else. For $1, Mark sighed, walking over to the sidebar to pour himself a drink. He didn't even look at me. It's a complex situation, Elena. As a protection, you wouldn't understand. To Jessica Thorne, he continued, a name testing light ash. You sold our home to the woman you're sleeping with for $1. He turned then, glass in hand, leaning against the bookshelf with a relaxed posture that made me want to scream. It's done, Elena. The paperwork is filed. The title has transferred. Technically, you're trespassing, but I'm willing to give you a way to pack your things. I'm not a monster. You forged my signature, he sighed, holding up the final page. My hand wasn't shaking. It was vibrating with a frequency of rage he had never known existed. This is a felony, Mark. This is fraud. He took a sip of his scotch. His eyes got and he did. Prove it. What? Prove it, he repeated, stepping closer. That looks exactly like your signature. I have a notary who will swear you were, sir. I have witnesses, Elena. Jessica has friends. You have, what? A history of anxiety. Who are they going to believe? The successful architect and the sweet young buyer, or the scorned, unstable wife trying to renege on a deal because she's bitter. The room seemed to shrink. The walls of the study, filled with books he had bought him, closed in. He had planned this. He had the notary. He had the narrative. He had set the stage so perfectly that the truth looked like a lie. You are trying to erase me, you realized aloud. You didn't just want to live. You wanted to destroy me. Mark set the glass down with a sharp clink. You wanted a fresh start. You were dragging me down, Elena. Always so emotional, so attached to things. This house is too much baggage. Jessica likes it though. She has ideas for the kitchen. She thinks the cabinets are outdated. The cabinets she had painted by hand. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was the sound of a mirror hitting the floor, a silver backing shattering into a million irreparable shards. The image he held of myself, the loving wife, the partner, the woman who built a home, disintegrated. He looked at him, really looked at him, and sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a stranger. a parasite in a sweet. The pain that had been drowning me for 3 days suddenly evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it should. He thought he had won. He thought that $1 was the period at the end of our sentence. He thought my shock was weakness. He stood up. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the paperweight at his head, though the urge surged through my arm. He carefully picked up the deed, folded it, and he placed it in my pocket. You think you're smart, Mark, he sighed softly. You know I am, he smirked. You always win. You know that. You think because you stole the house. You stole my power. He sighed, walking round the desk. He stopped inches from him. He could smell the scotch on his breath, mixed with the faint, sickening perfume of another woman. You think because you forged my name, you own my identity. But you forgot one thing. He raised an eyebrow, amused. And he was that. You forgot that he handled the insurance. You forgot that he handled the accounts before you locked me out. And you certainly forgot that a forgery, once proven, doesn't just void a sally. He leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. It sends the architect to prison. Mark's smile faltered, just a fraction, a hairline fracture in his confidence. Get out, he sighed, but the command lacked his your bite. I'm leaving, he sighed, walking to the door. I'm going to the police. Then I'm going to a forensic handwriting analyst. And then, Mark, I'm going to watch your fresh start burn to the ground, dollar by dollar. He walked out of the study, leaving him standing in the silence of the house he had stolen. As he stepped onto the porch, the cool evening air hitting my face, he didn't look back at the Victorian restoration. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene. And for the first time in this, as the pieces of the shattered mirror crunched under the weight of my resolve, he didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a witness for the prosecution. The silence in the house was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Mark sat across from me at the mahogany dining table, the clink of his silverware against the china echoing with an arrogance that made my skin crawl. He looked at me, really looked at me. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, only what he wanted to see, a woman broken by the weight of a failing marriage, a wife diminished, breathless with grief. He mistook my silence for submission and my hollow stare for defeat. He poured himself another glass of wine, a deep red liquid swirling like a portent of the bloodless war he was about to wage. You look tired, Elena, he sighed, his voice laced with a fox concern that was almost more insulting than his open hostility. Maybe you should go up to bed early. Leave the sinking to me. He offered a weak, tremorso manad, playing the part he had scripted for me. Perhaps you're right, he whispered, keeping my eyes lowered. You don't have the strength for this anymore. A satisfied smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He thought he had won. He thought the complexity of our assets, the hidden accounts, and the sheer audacity of his deception were beyond my comprehension. He believed that by breaking my heart, he had also broken my mind. He couldn't have been more wrong. The moment he retreated to his study, closing the door on what he assumed was a conquered kingdom, but trembling in my hands ceased. The slump in my shoulders evaporated, replaced by a rigid, poised posture. Despair could have consumed me. It certainly tried to in those first few harrowing nights. But as the shock receded, something else took its place, a cold, hard knot in the center of my chest. It wasn't the hot flash of temper, but a quiet, simmering fury that ignited a still within. He wasn't just angry. He was determined. He waited until the house was truly dark, until the rhythmic breathing from the master bedroom signaled his deep sleep. Then, he began my work. My sanctuary was not a bedroom, but a guest office downstairs, a room Mark rarely entered. For weeks, this had been my command center. He sat before my laptop, the screen's blue light illuminating a face that was no longer weeping, but calculating. My mission was clandestine, meticulous, and dangerous. He opened the encrypted folder, the password a string of characters only he knew. Inside lay the anatomy of our betrayal. It wasn't just about infidelity, it was about theft. Systematic, ruthless theft of my life's work and my inheritance. Let's see what you tried to bury today, Mark, he murmured to the empty room. He pulled up the digitized bank records he had subpoenaed through back channels before even filing for divorce. My eyes scanned the lines of data like a predator tracking prey. So it was another transfer to a shell company in the Caymans, disguised as a consulting fee. He was bleeding our joint accounts dry, funneling money away in preparation for the split, assuming you would be too emotional to notice the hemorrhage. But the financial records were just the foundation. The true weapon lay in the physical evidence he had gathered earlier that day. He reached into my bed and he pulled out a manila envelope, sliding the contents onto the desk. It was a forensic report, stamped and signed by one of the city's top handwriting experts. My heart rate didn't spike. It slowed, steady, and rhythmic. The document in question was a loan authorization against the deed of the lake house property had been in my family for 3 generations. The signature at the bottom read Elena Benz, a sweeping script that looked identical to mine to the untrained eye. But under the microscope of the expert he had hired, the hesitation marks, the pressure variances, and the telltale plots revealed the truth. It was a forgery, a felony. Mark hadn't just cheated on me. He had committed a crime to steal my legacy. He picked up my phone, dialing a number he now knew by heart. It was late, but he knew he would be awake. Sterling, the voice on the other end answered, crisp and alert. "You have the authentication, Arthur," he sighed, my voice devoid of the wavering tone used with Mark. "The signature is confirmed forged. The expert is willing to testify." Arthur Sterling was a shark in a tailored suit, a litigation attorney known for leaving scorch marks where his opponents once stood. He hadn't chosen him for his bedside manner. He chose him because he was little. "That changes the landscape entirely, Elena," Arthur replied, the smile audible in his voice. "We aren't looking at a settlement negotiation anymore. We're looking at fraud. This pierces the corporate deal on his business assets too. If he forged this, everything he's touched is suspect." "You want it all, Arthur," he sighed, staring at the fraudulent signature. "I don't just want a divorce. I want to dismantle the lie he's built. He thinks I'm a foolish woman who doesn't understand the finances. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes we've been tracking every penny, every lie, every digital footprint. We need the communication logs next," Arthur advised. "Proving the forgery is the sword, but the intent the malice does the shield. If we can prove he coordinated this with his forensic accountant to specifically defraud you, he won't just lose the house. He'll face jail time." "I'm already on it," he replied. He hung up and he turned back to the screen. This was the riskiest part of my operation. Mark was careful, but he was arrogant, and the arrogance breeds complacency. He believed his private email server was impenetrable because he had paid a fortune for it. But he had forgotten that for 3 years, he handled the household details too. He knew the recovery keys. He accessed the backup server, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. My breath hitched in my throat as the files populated. Hundreds of emails. He filtered them by the name of his accountant and the days coinciding with the mysterious transfers. Reading them was like drinking poison, but I forced myself to swallow every drop. "She has no more clue," one email from Mark read, dated 3 months ago. "She's too busy crying over the distance between us to look at the ledger. Just move the assets. By the time she lawyers up, she'll be begging for a payout just to survive." The cruelty was breathtaking. It stripped away any lingering sensation of love or nostalgia I might have held onto. It hardened the steel inside me. He wasn't just falling out of love. He was actively engineering my destruction. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply hit print and he then saved the external drive. He spent the next 2 hours organizing the evidence into the digital fortress he was constructing. Folder A, the adultery. Folder B, the embezzlement. Folder C, the forgery. Each document was a break in a wall that was becoming insurmountable. He wasn't just building a case. He was writing the final chapter of his ruin. He thought about the woman he was before, distrusting, open, perhaps a bit naive. Mark had killed that woman, but in her place, he had forged something far more dangerous. He had created an adversary who knew his secrets better than he knew them himself. As the sun began to bleed gray light through the blinds, he gathered the papers. The physical copies went into a safe hidden behind the built-in bookshelf, a safe he didn't know existed. The digital copies were mirrored on a cloud server Arthur controlled. He heard the floorboards creak upstairs. Mark was waking up. He quickly shut down the laptop, hid the external drive, and he stood up. He walked to the kitchen, my movements silent. He filled the kettle and he set it on the stove. When Mark walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later, dressed in his expensive suit, ready to conquer the world, he found me standing by the counter, looking pale and fragile. "Apple," he asked, grabbing an apple. He didn't wait for an answer. "I have a late meeting tonight. Don't wait up." "Okay," he sighed softly, turning to face him. He let my shoulders slump. He let my eyes look weary. "Have a good day, Mark." He kissed my forehead, a gesture so patronizing it made my stomach turn. "Try to get some rest, Elena. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." He walked out the door, whistling, oblivious to the fact that he had just kissed his executioner. As the door clicked shut, the slump vanished. He straightened my spine, pouring the boiling water into my mug. The steam rose up, hot and cleansing. He took a sip, the heat spreading through my chest, matching the fire of my resolve. The evidence was ready. The trap was set. He thought he was defeated, but he was just waiting for the perfect moment to snap the jaws shut. The time for mourning was over. The time for reckoning had begun. He walked back to the office, picked up the phone, and he dialed Arthur again. "It's done," he sighed. "File the papers." The silence in the house was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, light the air before a thunderstorm breaks. Mark sat across from me at the mahogany dining table, the clink of his silverware against the china echoing with an arrogance that made my skin crawl. He looked at me, really looked at me. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam only what he wanted to see, a woman broken by the weight of a failing marriage, a wife diminished, breathless with grief. He mistook my silence for submission and my hollow stare for defeat. He poured himself another glass of wine, the deep red liquid swirling like a portent of the bloodless war he was about to wage. You look tired, Elena, he sighed, his voice laced with a fox concern that was almost more insulting than his open hostility. Maybe you should go up to bed early. Leave the sinking to me. He offered a weak, tremorso manat, playing the part he had scripted for me. Perhaps you're right, he whispered, keeping my eyes lowered. You don't have the strength for this anymore. A satisfied smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. He thought he had won. He thought the complexity of our assets, the hidden accounts, and the sheer audacity of his deception were beyond my comprehension. He believed that by breaking my heart, he had also broken my mind. He couldn't have been more wrong. The moment he retreated to his study, closing the door on what he assumed was a conquered kingdom, but trembling in my hands ceased. The slump in my shoulders evaporated, replaced by a rigid, poised posture. Despair could have consumed me. It certainly tried to in those first few harrowing nights. But as the shock receded, something else took its place, a cold, hard knot in the center of my chest. It wasn't the hot flash of temper, but a quiet, simmering fury that ignited a still within. He wasn't just angry. He was determined. He waited until the house was truly dark, until the rhythmic breathing from the master bedroom signaled his deep sleep. Then, he began my work. My sanctuary was not a bedroom, but a guest office downstairs, a room Mark rarely entered. For weeks, this had been my command center. He sat before my laptop, the screen's blue light illuminating a face that was no longer weeping, but calculating. My mission was clandestine, meticulous, and dangerous. He opened the encrypted folder, the password a string of characters only he knew. Inside lay the anatomy of our betrayal. It wasn't just about infidelity, it was about theft. Systematic, ruthless theft of my life's work and my inheritance. Let's see what you tried to bury today, Mark, he murmured to the empty room. He pulled up the digitized bank records he had subpoenaed through back channels before even filing for divorce. My eyes scanned the lines of data like a predator tracking prey. So it was another transfer to a shell company in the Caymans, disguised as a consulting fee. He was bleeding our joint accounts dry, funneling money away in preparation for the split, assuming he would be too emotional to notice the hemorrhage. But the financial records were just the foundation. The true weapon lay in the physical evidence he had gathered earlier that day. He reached into my bag and he pulled out a manila envelope, sliding the contents onto the desk. It was a forensic report, stamped and signed by one of the city's top handwriting experts. My heart rate didn't spike. It slowed, steady, and rhythmic. The document in question was a loan authorization against the deed of the lighthouse property had been in my family for 3 generations. The signature at the bottom read Elena Benz, a sweeping script that looked identical to mine to the untrained eye. But under the microscope of the expert he had hired, the hesitation marks, the pressure variances, and the telltale plots revealed the truth. It was a forgery, a felony. Mark hadn't just cheated on me. He had committed a crime to steal my legacy. He picked up my phone, dialing a number he now knew by heart. It was late, but he knew he would be awake. Sterling, the voice on the other end answered, crisp and alert. You have the authentication, Arthur, he sighed, my voice devoid of the wavering tone used with Mark. The signature is confirmed forged. The expert is willing to testify. Arthur Sterling was a shark in a tailored suit, a litigation attorney known for leaving scorch marks where his opponents once stood. He hadn't chosen him for his bedside manner. He chose him because he was little. That changes the landscape entirely, Elena, Arthur replied, the smile audible in his voice. We aren't looking at a settlement negotiation anymore. We're looking at fraud. This pierces the corporate tail on his business assets too. If he forged this, everything he's touched is suspect. You want it all, Arthur, he sighed, staring at the fraudulent signature. You don't just want a divorce. You want to dismantle the lie he's built. He thinks I'm a foolish woman who doesn't understand the finances. You want to see the look on his face when he realizes you've been tracking every penny, every lie, every digital footprint. We need the communication logs next, Arthur advised. Proving the forgery is the sword, but the intent of malice is the shield. If we can prove he coordinated this with his forensic accountant specifically before you, he won't just lose the house. He'll face jail time. I'm already on it, he replied. He hung up and he turned back to the screen. This was the riskiest part of my operation. Mark was careful, but he was arrogant, and the arrogance breeds complacency. He believed his private email server was impenetrable because he had paid a fortune for it. But he had forgotten that for 3 years, he handled the household details too. He knew the recovery keys. He accessed the backup server, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. My breath hitched in my throat as the files populated. Hundreds of emails. He filtered them by the name of his accountant and the days coinciding with the mysterious transfers. Reading them was like drinking poison, but I forced myself to swallow every drop. She has no more crew. One email from Mark Reed, dated 3 months ago. She's too busy crying over the distance between us to look at the ledger. Just move the assets. By the time she lawyers up, she'll be begging for a payout just to survive. The cruelty was breathtaking. It stripped away any lingering sensation of love or nostalgia I might have held onto. It hardened the steel inside me. He wasn't just falling out of love. He was actively engineering my destruction. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply hit print and he then saved the external drive. He spent the next 2 hours organizing the evidence into the digital fortress he was constructing. Folder A, the adultery. Folder B, the embezzlement. Folder C, the forgery. Each document was a break in a wall that was becoming insurmountable. He wasn't just building a case. He was writing the final chapter of his ruin. He thought about the woman he was before, distrusting, open, perhaps a bit naive. Mark had killed that woman, but in her place, he had forged something far more dangerous. He had created an adversary who knew his secrets better than he knew them himself. As the sun began to bleed gray light through the blinds, he gathered the papers. The physical copies went into a safe hidden behind the built-in bookshelf, a safe he didn't know existed. The digital copies were mirrored on a cloud server Arthur controlled. He heard the floorboards creak upstairs. Mark was waking up. He quickly shut down the laptop, hid the external drive, and he stood up. He walked to the kitchen, my movements silent. He filled the kettle and he set it on the stove. When Mark walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later, dressed in his expensive suit, ready to conquer the world, he found me standing by the counter, looking pale and fragile. "Apple," he asked, grabbing an apple. He didn't wait for an answer. "I have a late meeting tonight. Don't wait up." "Okay," he said softly, turning to face him. He let my shoulders slump. He let my eyes look weary. "Have a good day, Mark." He kissed my forehead, a gesture so patronizing it made my stomach turn. "Try to get some rest, Elena. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." He walked out the door, whistling, oblivious to the fact that he had just kissed his executioner. As the door clicked shut, the slump vanished. He straightened my spine, pouring the boiling water into my mug. The steam rose up, hot and cleansing. He took a sip, the heat spreading through my chest, matching the fire of my resolve. The evidence was ready. The trap was set. He thought he was defeated, but he was just waiting for the perfect moment to snap the jaws shut. The time for mourning was over. The time for reckoning had begun. He walked back to the office, picked up the phone, and he dialed Arthur again. "It's done," he sighed. "File the papers." He paced the length of the mahogany conference table, the click of his expensive Italian loafers on the parquet floor echoing like the ticking of a bomb he was too deaf to hear. Mark adjusted his cufflinks, a preening gesture he knew so well, checking his reflection in the darkened window pane that overlooked the city skyline. He looked every inch a conqueror he believed himself to be. Impeccable suit, jaw set in practiced determination, eyes gleaming with the thrill of the kill. He strutted, oblivious, basking in what he perceived as his triumph, confident in my supposed capitulation. He sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, playing the part of the defeated spouse to perfection. It was a role he had written for me years ago, and for the first time, he was performing it not out of fear, but out of strategy. Beside me, my attorney, Elias, remained statuesque, his pen hovering over the yellow legal pad, his face a mask of professional boredom that concealed a predatory alertness. "You don't know why we had to drag this out, Elena," Mark sighed, turning to face me with a sigh that dripped with condescension. He placed both hands on the back of the empty chair opposite me, leaning in as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "I told you 6 months ago that you wouldn't survive without my infrastructure. You don't have the head for numbers, and you certainly don't have the stomach for a fight." He kept my eyes lowered, counting the seconds. "You know, Mark," he whispered, my voice deliberately trembling just enough to feed his ego. It's a lot to process. It's numbers, Elena. It's black and white." He scoffed, waving a hand dismissively at a stack of documents in the center of the table. These were the settlement papers he had drafted, a lopsided agreement that would strip me of my equity in the company we had built together, leaving me with a pittance called generosity. "I'm offering you a clean break. Most men in my position would bury you in litigation until you were selling your jewelry for rent." Mark's arrogance was a repulsive spectacle, but he allowed it, maintaining a serene exterior while he inadvertently dug his own grave. Every dismissive glance, every contemptuous remark about my supposed naivete, only fueled my resolve and provided more ammunition for my attorney. I watched him, strategically silent, as he unknowingly wove the very rope that would ultimately bring about his spectacular downfall, oblivious to the meticulously laid traps. Elias cleared his throat softly. My client is prepared to sign, strictly based on the disclosures of assets you've provided today, Mark. However, she needs verbal reassurance regarding the offshore accounts, just for her peace of mind. Mark laughed, a sharp, barking sound. He began to patch again, energized by the smell of blood in the water. He thought Elias was weak, a discount lawyer he had hired out of desperation. He had no more idea that Elias was a forensic accountant with a law degree, and that the recording device in Elias' pocket was cordially capturing every syllable. Peace of mind, Mark sneered, looking at me with pity. Honey, said I don't know more offshore accounts. I told you, the Cayman entity was dissolved years ago. If you say the money isn't, sir, it isn't, sir. You're imagining dragons were set at only windmills. This is exactly why you were never fit to sit on the board. He looked up then, meeting his gaze with wide, watery eyes. But the transfers, Mark, the ones from the devastating Kitty Gallows, I just want to know they didn't go to waste. He stopped pacing. He looked at Elias, then back at me. The trap was so obvious, yet his narcissism was a blindfold thick enough to block out the sun. He couldn't resist the urge to crack me, to prove he was the smartest person in the room, to brag about how he had engineered the laws to save the capital. You really don't get it, do you? Mark lowered his voice, leaning in closer, his tone conspiring and this Mark. There was no more loss, Elena. That capital had to be moved to protect it from this exact scenario. From you, from lawyers. He moved it through the shell company in shell companies you couldn't even pronounce, let alone find. It's sitting safe and the sound where no more judge can touch it, waiting for the dust to settle. He didn't lose the money. He saved it. From your incompetence. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Mark straightened up, adjusting his tie, looking pleased with his own brilliance. He had just admitted to hiding assets and the perjury in the middle of a settlement negotiation, explicitly contradicting the sworn financial affidavit sitting on the table. So, Mark sighed, clapping his hands together. Are we done with the bedtime stories? Sign the papers, Elena. Let the adults get back to work. He looked at Elias. He didn't smile. He was too professional for it, but the slight nod he gave me was louder than a shout. The recording was secure. The admission was clear. Mark had just handed us the keys to everything. He picked up the pen. The weight of it felt good, like a weapon. He looked at the signature line on the document that would have left me destitute. You're right, Mark, he sighed, my voice changing. The tremble was gone. The softness evaporated, replaced by the cold, hot steel that had been forging inside me for the last year. You don't have the stomach for this kind of fight. Mark blinked, sensing the shift in tone but unable to process it. Excuse me, you don't have the stomach for a fight where the opponent is unarmed, he continued, setting the pen down without signing. He stood up, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. He proffered a challenge. Mark's brow furrowed. Sit down, Elena. What are you doing? We're leaving, Elias sighed, snapping his briefcase shut with a finality that made Mark flinch. Andy will be filing an emergency motion to freeze all assets, including the ones in the shell companies she can pronounce, based on the admission you just made. Admission? What admission? Mark scoffed, his face reddening. This is a settlement meeting. It's privileged, not when it involves the confession of an ongoing crime regarding hidden marital assets. Elias sighed smoothly, standing up. Andy, certainly not when you've just invalidated your own affidavit. We have what we need. Mark looked at me, his mouth slightly open, the realization slowly dawning on him like a creeping frost. The arrogance began to fracture, revealing the panic beneath. He looked at the papers, then at the door, then at me. Elena. He sighed, his voice dropping an octave, losing its strut. Don't play games. You know you can't win. He walked toward the door, pausing as he passed him. He didn't look at him with anger. He looked at him with the same indifference he had shown me for a decade. The game is over, Mark, he sighed softly. You just didn't realize you were the only one playing by the old rules. He walked out into the hallway, Elias right behind me. As the heavy door clicked shut, he heard the sound of something glass shattering against the wall inside the conference room. It was the sound of a temper tantrum, the sound of a man realizing the puppet strings had been chewed, and that the stain he thought he commanded was collapsing beneath his feet. He didn't look back. He finally had the silence he needed to plan the rest of his ruin. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom seemed to seal us inside a vacuum, a space where time moved differently, weighted down by the gravity of impending judgment. The air smelled of floor wax and distilled coffee, a scent you would forever associate with the end of my old life. He sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, observing the scene with a detachment that bordered on the surreal. A year ago, the mere thought of this confrontation would have sent me into a spiral of panic. Today, however, my heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm. It was the eye of the storm. The chaos was entirely Mark's bear. Across the aisle, Mark shifted in his seat, the expensive fabric of his suit straining against the tension in his shoulders. He leaned over to whisper frantically to his counsel, his face flushed a mottled red. He looked diminished, stripped of the arrogance that had once been his armor. Beside me, my attorney, Mr. Sterling, adjusted his cuffs. He was a man of few words and precise actions, a predator in a pinstripe suit who had spent the last 3 hours systematically dismantling Mark as defense. Mr. Reynolds, Sterling began, his voice cutting through the low hum of the room like a scalpel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Let U.S. return to Exhibit D, the deed of sale for the marital residence. Mark stiffened, his eyes darting toward the judge before settling into a glare directed at Sterling. We've been over this, Mark snapped, his voice tight. It was a legitimate sale to a private holding company, necessary for liquidity. Sterling walked slowly toward the witness stand, holding a document that he knew by heart. Liquidity, an interesting choice of words, because, according to the bank records, where subpoena records you fought very hard to suppress the holding company, Obsidian Ventures, lists a singular beneficiary. Sterling paused for effect, letting the silence stretch until it was almost painful. He turned the document toward the courtroom. You, Mr. Reynolds. A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. Mark's attorney half rose to object, but the lack of conviction in his movement was telling. He sat back down. That's a clerical error, Mark stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. You have no more knowledge of that filing. No more knowledge? Sterling picked up another piece of paper. Then perhaps you have no more knowledge of the signature on the incorporation papers. A signature that a forensic handwriting expert has already testified, under oath, matches yours with a 99% probability. Or perhaps you have no more knowledge of the transfer of funds $300,000 from your joint savings account into this shell company Meredith before you filed for divorce. The web was unraveling. Every lie Mark had spun, every forged document he had sneered at me about in private, was being put into the harsh fluorescent light of the court. The legal sale of our home, the house he had built a life in, was nothing more than a sleight of hand, a desperate attempt to hide assets so he could leave me with nothing but dust. It was my money, Mark suddenly shouted, slamming his hand against the railing of the witness box. The sudden violence of the outburst made the stenographer jump. He earned it. He built this life. She just sat, sir. She doesn't deserve a dime of my hard work. Order! The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot, silencing the room instantly. Judge Holloway, a stern woman with eyes that seemed to have seen every variety of human deceit, lowered her glasses and stared at Mark. Mr. Reynolds, another outburst lighted, and he will have you held in contempt. Answer the question. He was protecting my assets, Mark said, his voice trembling with a toxic mix of rage and fear. She was going to bleed me dry by forging her signature on the spousal consent forms, Sterling asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. By creating a fraudulent buyer. By lying to this court in your initial financial disclosure. Mark fell silent. His chest heaved, his eyes wide and frantic, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps searching for the woman who would have crumbled under his anger, who would have apologized for making him upset. But that woman was gone. He met his gaze with a cold, impenetrable stare. He offered him nothing. No more pity, no more anger, just a mirror of his own destruction. Sterling turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the evidence is irrefutable. We have fraud, forgery, and illegal asset dissipation. The defendant has acted in bad faith from the inception of these proceedings. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Holloway shuffled the papers before her. The rustling of the pages sounded like thunder in the quiet room. She took a moment, perhaps savoring the clarity of the verdict, before looking up. Mr. Reynolds, the judge began, her tone devoid of warmth. This court has seen many contentious divorces, but rarely have we seen such a calculated and malicious attempt to defraud a spouse and the judicial system itself. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. The sale of the property located at 42 Willow Creek is hereby nullified immediately, she declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority. The deed is to be reverted to the joint names of the parties involved. Furthermore, due to the undeniable evidence of asset concealment, I am ordering an immediate freeze on all accounts connected to Mr. Reynolds, including the offshore holdings identified by the plaintiff's counsel. A gasp escaped Mark's lips, a sound of pure devastation. You can't do that. That's my operating capital. You'll bankrupt me. You should have thought of that before you committed perjury and defraud in my courtroom. Judge Holloway sat back, her face hard as stone. In addition to the restitution of legal fees which you will pay in full to the plaintiff, I am imposing the maximum civil penalty allowed by law for your financial misconduct. And let me be clear. I am forwarding the transcript of these proceedings to the district attorney's office for review regarding the forgery charges. Mark slumped back into his chair, looking as though he had been physically struck. The color had drained completely from his face, leaving him a gray, trembling shell. He looked at his attorney, but the man was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the blast radius. The gavel banged one final time, a sound of finality that echoed in my bones. Court is adjourned. As the room broke into movement, a profound sensation washed over me. It wasn't happiness. Exactly, it was heavier than that. It was the feeling of gravity returning to a world that had been spinning out of control. He watched Mark as the bailiff approached him regarding the asset freeze. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The monster he had terrorized my emotional life, who had threatened to leave me destitute, was this man in a suit who had played a gambit and he lost everything. He stood up, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. Sterling turned to me, offering a rare, genuine smile. It's over, he said softly. You got everything. No more. I corrected him, my voice steady, my eyes still fixed on the man who had tried to break me. He didn't just get everything. He got the truth. He turned my back on Mark Reynolds and he walked toward the heavy oak doors. For the first time in years, that air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like the beginning. The silence that filled the hallway was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating and final. It was the sound of a kingdom collapsing under the weight of his own hubris. He stood at the top of the stairs, my hand resting lightly on the banister he had once polished with pride, looking down at the chaotic scene unfolding in the foyer below. This was the moment the forensic accountants had promised, the inevitable collision of Mark's lies with the unyielding wall of reality. The court orders were absolute. The assets he had tried so desperately to hide, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the equity he had drained from our future to fund his vices had been exposed, seized, and reallocated. Mark was on his knees, not in prayer, but in a frantic search through a box of documents, his hands trembling with a palsy of panic. His designer suit, once his armor against the world, looked disheveled, the collar unbuttoned, the fabric wrinkled. He was shouting into his phone, his voice cracking with a desperation that was entirely foreign to the arrogant man who had discarded me months ago. You can freeze the account. Do you know who I am? He screamed, his face flushed a mottled crimson. You have transfers pending. This is a mistake. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen in disbelief as the line went dead. The banks had finally caught up. The investors he had defrauded were closing in. His reputation, once sterling in the city's financial district, was now radioactive. Standing near the door, clutching a Louis Vuitton weekend bag looked ludicrously out of place, was Elena. She was watching him, but the adoration that had once sickened me was gone. In its place was a cold, calculating assessment. She was watching a luxury liner sink, and she was checking for lifeboats. Mark, she sighed, her voice sharp, cutting through his muttering. The card didn't work at the hotel. They said it was declined. Reported stolen or insufficient funds. Mark looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. It's a glitch, Elena. I told you, the freezing order is temporary. You just need a few days to liquidate the crypto assets and move those are no more crypto assets. Mark, he said. My voice was quiet, yet it carried through the foyer with the acoustics of a judge's gavel. Both of them looked up. He descended the stairs slowly, each step a testament to the ground he had reclaimed. He was no more longer the weeping wife begging for an explanation. He was the architect of this reckoning. The forensic audit found the wallets. It continued, reaching the landing. Empty. You leveraged them to pay off the gambling debts you incurred in Macau last year. It's all in the discovery files, page 402. You have nothing, Mark. Actually, that's not true. You have 7 losses for fraud and a negative net worth. Mark scrambled to his feet, a wild look in his eyes. You did this, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. You vindictive witch. You poisoned them against me. You ruined my life. You ruined yourself, he replied, my pulse steady. He simply turned on the lights. Elena dropped her bag. The sound was a dull thud on the marble floor. She looked from Mark, sweating and manic, to me, standing calm and immutable in the home that was now legally solely mine. The calculus in her eyes was transparent. She had signed up for the high life, for the power trip, for the man who could give her everything. She was looking at a man who couldn't even pay for a cab. Is it true? Elena asked, turning to him. The lawsuits? They're dead, baby. Listen, Mark pleaded, reaching for her arm. She recoiled as if he were contagious. It's a cash flow issue, a temporary setback. We can go to your sister's place, just for a week, until we get the bridge loan. My sister lives in a studio apartment, Elena sneered, her face twisting into a mask of disgust. You told me you were a king, Mark. You told me she gestured vaguely at me, was holding you back. But look at you, you're pathetic. Toward hung in the air, stripping the last shred of dignity from his bones. Elena, don't do this, Mark whimpered. I'm not going down with you, she sighed, picking up her bag. She didn't look at me. She couldn't bear to meet the eyes of the woman she had wronged, not now that the tables had turned so violently. She opened the heavy oak door. Lose my number, Mark. The door slammed shut, the echo vibrating through the house. Mark stood alone in the center of the foyer, the silence rushing by to fill the space where his ego used to be. He looked at the closed door, then slowly turned to face me. The bravado was gone. The anger had evaporated, leaving only a hollow, terrified shell. Sophie, he whispered, soft, please. He took a step toward me. We have history. 20 years. You can't just let me fall like this. He could go to prison. He looked at him, searching for any flicker of the love he had once held for him. He remembered the nights he had waited up, the excuses he had believed, the gaslighting that had made me question my own sanity. He remembered the moment he found out about Elena, and the cruel laughter with which he had dismissed my pain. You made your choices, Mark, he sighed, my voice devoid of malice, devoid of pity. It was simply the truth. You chose to lie. You chose to steal. You chose to betray. And when he offered you a quiet settlement a year ago, you chose war. You wanted to destroy me. You wanted to leave me with nothing. He was angry. He choked out. He didn't mean it. We can fix this. He can help you run the estate. He knows the accounts better than anyone. He laughed then, a soft, dry sound. You don't know the accounts, Mark. You know how to drain them. And this isn't our estate. It is my home. The deed was transferred this morning. The locks are being changed in an hour. He walked past him to the front door and he opened it wide. The afternoon sun spilled in, bright and blinding, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the dust of the old life, finally settling. It's time for you to leave, he said. Where will you go? He asked, his voice breaking. That, he said, is no more longer my concern. You are free, Mark. Free of me. Free of the marriage you despised. Free of the responsibilities you shirked. You have your freedom. I suggest you use it to find a public defender. He stared at me for a long moment, waiting for me to crack, waiting for the empathetic Sophie to emerge and save him from the consequences of his own actions. But the Sophie was gone, burned away in the fires of his betrayal. In her place stood a woman forged in steel and grace. Shoulders slumped, defeated, Mark picked up his single box of belongings. He walked out the door, stepping from the cool sanctuary of the house into the harsh, exposing light of the driveway. He looked smaller than he had ever seen him. He closed the door. The latch clicked, a sound of supreme finality. He leaned my back against the wood and he exhaled. For the first time in years, the air in the house felt clean. It was no more longer tainted by the scent of his cologne or the heavy atmosphere of his secrets. He walked into the living room, a space vast and open. The furniture he had insisted on was gone, so to cover his legal fees. The room was sparse, ready for new things, ready for my taste, my choices, my life. He walked to the window and he watched his car, a rental, pull away from the curb and he disappeared down the street. A profound sense of peace settled over me, wrapping around my shoulders like a warm shawl. This was not just survival. Survival is messy. It is gasping for air while treading water. This was something else entirely. This was ascent. He had walked through the valley of the shadow of his narcissism and he emerged on the other side, not bitter, but clarified. He had reclaimed my financial independence, stripping away the tangled web of debt he had tried to weave around me. He had reclaimed my home, purging it of his ghost. But most importantly, he had reclaimed the sovereignty of my own mind. He went to the kitchen and he poured a glass of water, a simple act feeling ceremonial. The sunlight hit the glass, reflecting into a small rainbow on the granite countertop. The nightmare was over. The wreckage was behind me. He was standing in the center of my own life, the sole ruler of my future. The path ahead was unwritten, no more longer dictated by his chaos or his demands. It was mine to shape, mine to build. It took a sip of water, cool and refreshing. It was so fine. It was whole. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, he knew that the best part of my life was not the history he had lost but the masterpiece he was about to create. This was my sovereign ascent, and he was just beginning to rise.